Hello and welcome to this skating lesson. I'm Dave Leese, and today I'm thrilled to welcome international sports expert and doping expert Hajo Seppelt to the show. Welcome.
Welcome too. Hello from Germany.
Yes, you were from Berlin, as you were just telling me. So I wanted to get your perspective. So much has happened in the world since the Olympics, but as far as the case of the Kamila Valieva doping scandal, where actually are we? The CAS allowed her to compete, but where does this process go from here?
The next steps in this process will be proceedings interestingly held by RUSADA, the Russian anti-doping agency. I'm not so far if they are not biased in the whole context, but this is a regular procedure. So the Russian anti-doping agency itself is responsible for dealing with the Valieva case.
What would happen if they come back and wouldn't charge her or wouldn't suspend her with anything? What would WADA's position be? What would the courts be? What would the ISU? How does that all factor into this?
I can imagine if RUSADA finally will decide not to ban her, not to sanction her, or just give her maybe a very mild warning, then I can imagine that WADA would appeal against this decision. I can imagine because at least indirectly, IOC via the International Testing Agency is also involved in the matter, that other parties would join that proceeding at the International Court of Arbitration of Sports, CAS, in Lausanne, in Switzerland. That might happen finally. We have already learned that at the beginning of the whole case, RUSADA had suspended her, and just one day later, the so-called disciplinary committee from RUSADA has said, no, we don't suspend her, she can compete, which gives for me a clear indication for that there are still some people in Russia who obviously don't want to follow the rules.
Mm-hmm. So should they not, how long would this process take? Should RUSADA come back? Is this looking at a year? How long these cases certainly? To
be honest, we don't know yet, absolutely. I don't know if all the war conditions in the moment will have an influence on that. I have no idea. In the moment, it can happen within weeks, it can happen within months, it can take longer, and maybe there are some people who are really interested to delay the whole process for obvious reasons. But simply, I don't know. All what has been explained, what has been told the public as excuse from Valieva's part is, from my point of view, not credible, absolutely not credible. And I have had the opportunity to see what WADA had written in its statement in the Beijing CAS ad hoc procedure, and it was very clear that WADA didn't believe Valieva's lawyers only a single word. Nothing. So it seemed to be very clear that WADA has a very clear standpoint on that. That means, at least for now, and we talk about the procedure starting with an A sample, we don't know so far anything about the B sample, but in the current situation, it's very clear what WADA's position is. That means that Valieva is under suspicion of doping.
Well, let's talk about what her lawyers put forward. They said that Valieva herself, they said, was taking hypoxin because she had a need for it for heart medication, that doctors differed, even two Russian doctors differed on this. But then they said that she got the trimetazidine from her grandfather. So those seem to be differing accounts for similar medications. What stuck out to you in what her lawyer said?
I don't believe it, to be honest. That's what I think about it, because all the excuse, all the circumstances Valieva's lawyers told within the meeting, at the CAS meeting, are really very, very strange, because that would mean that many, let's say, circumstances at the same time must have been occurred, which each of them is not credible, and if you take them together, makes it even more incredible. So to believe that she drank from the same glass as her grandfather did, that would mean even that, only that would mean that this is a very, very rare situation that happens. The next thing is that to, let's say, contaminate her urine by DNA from a glass, it's according to experts also not a very probable situation. So I would also say this is not credible. And there are so many other things. For example, that her grandfather had receipts, obviously received from a pharmacy, but they couldn't make clear that these receipts are prescriptions. I talk about prescriptions. That these prescriptions are really genuine, and even more, they couldn't provide any receipts for buying the stuff, so far as I remember. But I'm not sure about that. But anyway, the whole circumstances, if you would see it from at the bottom line, don't seem at all credible from my point of view.
Also, she was at the end of a competition in St. Petersburg, and the grandfather lives in Moscow, which is outside.
Okay, we don't know that, because maybe she's traveling a lot. At least that's what they told, that she spends a lot of time with her grandfather. So.
But it was done at a competition, was the test, and for a competition.
Yes, but we have no idea about how long is a detection window for traumatizidine. So that's what I don't know. We don't know exactly when it has allegedly taken or when the glass was used by her. We don't know that. So I would not discuss on that matter, because that's maybe too specific. But in general, the whole circumstances, as I said, don't seem for me really a reliable explanation.
How do you make that Rusada's actually found her? In the case, Rusada hasn't, typically found their athletes. And in some of your work, Yulia Stepanova talked about protected athletes, athletes having certain protected status during, certainly Olympics, that certain athletes would never, test positive. She was supposed to be the star of the Olympics. Did something go wrong on Rusada's end that this even happened?
They had no choice. They had to report that case. Just imagine they wouldn't have done that. We found a situation a couple of years ago. Rusada was in the middle of a big storm globally with respect to anti-doping and all what has been taken place in Russia. So they are still maybe, let's say, closely watched by WADA, and only one mistake, and that would be a major mistake, would lead to another ban, another sanction. So they had no choice. They had to do that. That, for me, explains very good how it happened, because Rusada had no choice. They had to suspend her. But one day later, their own disciplinary committee said, okay, we don't suspend her anymore. And then they could say, okay, we are independent from Rusada. We can do what we want. And Rusada can claim we have nothing to do with our so-called independent disciplinary committee. So that might explain how it worked at the very end. But as I said, Rusada had no choice. They had to do that. And now we will really see with with great interest how they proceed in that matter, if they are really independent or not. And this is another example where they can prove if anything has been developed in a better way in the last couple of years or not. We will see that with great interest.
What is your take? You were very critical of the 6 weeks that it took for the sample to be tested after the competition. What do you make of the excuses given for that at the time?
Okay, there have been two excuses. The first excuse was that due to Corona, due to COVID, there was not enough staff in the Stockholm lab in Sweden in order to do their regular work. This is one explanation. The other one was that Rusada didn't ask for immediate analysis of the sample, what would have been possible, but they didn't. That's what I don't understand, because they knew exactly that she wanted to compete at Beijing Olympics. So this makes for me no sense. On the other hand, maybe they didn't think about that she might have been positive, because maybe some people in Russia, Tutberidze, her coach, or others like this infamous doctor who has been involved in Xenon practices in the past, obviously, that they did their own thing, and Rusada and all the other people didn't know about that. I can imagine that. It's not only state-run doping in Russia at some point. and to a certain degree, it's also, let's call it personal doping from coaches to athletes, and maybe other people don't know about it, or maybe don't want to know about it.
Well, let's talk about Dr. Shvetsky and Eteri Tutberidze. They both came into prominence in figure skating around the same time. After 2010 is when they both really rose through the ranks of figure skating. Dr. Shvetsky had been banned for 7 rowers from period 2007 to 2010. How did he wind up in figure skating? It seems strange that a banned doctor, someone coming off of a suspension, would wind up in the sport.
You're very good prepared, I have to say. But what I can say about doping is maybe a lot. What I can say about figure skating, not so much, because I'm not an expert on figure skating. So I have no idea why around 2010 or later, Shvetsky was suddenly part of the figure skating scene in Russia. I have no idea. But maybe he was at that point at least a famous, or you can also say an infamous, expert in doping in Russia, and maybe that was one of the reasons they wanted to work with him. And if you know that he was doing a scientific work on Xenon a couple of years later, that means he was also a kind of scientist. So maybe they wanted to use his scientific skills for improved performances of very young athletes. But we need to understand here one thing, that he was charged of a forbidden, prohibited method, as you mentioned already, with the rowers, the Russian rowers, and he said himself, yes, I was responsible for it. But that means he took over the responsibility for that in order to avoid bans for the rowers. So at the bottom line, that means he was guilty of doping, and he admitted it already. And then the ban was reduced from 4 to 2 years in 2010, and that helped him to get back in sports. And since we are aware of that, there was a really big Russian doping culture in place at that time. So people thought maybe it doesn't work without doping. So we need these guys, these so-called experts, in order to help also figure skating. I'm not that sure if Xenon, as this gas, is really, really helpful for very young athletes. But at the very end, I would estimate that the use of Xenon gas, if it has been administered also to young figure skaters, which I don't know, but if happened, it would have the same effect as it would have to all the athletes. That means it's independent from how old you are. If you take it, it will help you to breathe. It will help you to get more oxygen in your body. So at the very end, it's a kind of doping. And we did the first story on that in German television, together with The Economist, if I remember right, in 2014. And we could expose that for many, many years. I would estimate hundreds of Russian athletes, Olympic champions, world champions, European champions, have been part of the Xenon's, let's say, doping system in Russia. But I have to mention, at that point, it was not prohibited. So they used a loophole, like always in sports, which they found maybe very efficient for their purposes. And immediately after we did the story in 2014, it was shortly after the Sochi Olympics. It took just several months, and Xenon was in the WADA prohibited list. At the same time, Shvetsky did his scientific work on that. So you can imagine it was prohibited, but it was obviously no reason for him to continue his work on that and to propose it as a possible method for young athletes, or for athletes in general.
But he continued his work, is what you're saying, after that point? Yeah.
Yes, he did it until, I think, 2016, 2017. So we published, during the Sochi Olympics, ARD German television published this paper in one of our stories. So it's a clear proof.
Mm-hmm. There's also been talk that he has a business importing xenon gas, is one of the things I saw published.
But that's what I don't know, to be honest. I have no knowledge about that. But if you ask me if I think that's possible, I would say yes, I can imagine that.
Mhm. Have you ever seen a case where in other sports an anesthesiologist or an anesthetist would be a team doctor and be so visible in all competitions at the boards?
No, I don't know, but maybe because I simply don't know it, and that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. What I don't examine always the background of doctors in sports, so there might be also others who are working usually in clinics on that field, and then they do their work also in sports, but I have no real numbers or figures on that.
He's become very, very seen very often in figure skating. You'll see him with Tutberidze at the boards. He was sitting, you know, with the skaters in the box. So it's definitely.
That he was there, and that it makes really sense that he used his, let's say, scientific background for his work with athletes. That is very a very probable scenario.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your work, is it the Russian state that's always paying for the doping? Do athletes have to pay themselves? You know, there's so much of a discussion about her being 15, Kamila Valieva being 15, and how much did she know? How much did the coaches know? Is she being given? I know you talked about boxes of vitamins, of, you know, supplements being given to athletes. You know, how young does it start?
I don't know how young does it start, but it's obviously a pattern. I remember how it worked in East German sports. When I talk about East German doping system, I remember the very young female swimmers, 12, 13, 14 years old. They had pill boxes around the swimming pool, and they were forced to take these pills in front of the doctor or in front of the coach. This is a scenario I remember well from my research 20, 30 years ago. And this pattern.
I wanted to know, you've written about vitamin boxes being given to athletes by Eteri Tutberidze. Obviously, she starts training skaters at a high level at a young age, 9, 10 years old often. How early does this start?
I have no idea about the situation in Russia because I'm not so deeply involved in research in figure skating. But what I can say that this is a pattern which remembers me to the old East German times. I did the research on doping in East Germany with female young swimmers 20, 30 years ago. And this was exactly the same scenario around the swimming pool. There have been pill boxes, and the young female swimmers, 12, 13, 14, had to take their pills in front of the coach or the doctor. They have been forced to do it and to take it. And when they ask about, then it has been said in many cases, according to what I heard, what people testified to me, that they have been said, you, please don't talk about it and take it. These are vitamins. But at the very end, they realized maybe a month or years later that these haven't been vitamins but anabolic steroids. And you know about the side effects of anabolic steroids in sports, what happens to young female athletes when they take too many of them. So this was very dangerous. This was very risky for their health. But this was the system in East Germany. And when I heard all this about Tutberidze, it reminded me to the same situation what I read and investigated myself many years ago.
Mm-hmm. And as we wrap things up, with all of your research into Russia, they haven't had a flag at the Olympics since 2016. They haven't been able to use, obviously, their name. There's no anthem being played. Have you seen steps being taken through your research that Russia is trying to clean up its doping policies?
I'm not allowed to enter Russia anymore. And of course, in the current situation, I wouldn't go there. But it's 2018, they didn't allow me to enter Russia for the FIFA World Cup. They denied a visa for me. And then German security authorities told me that it might be too risky because afterwards FIFA told them you have to provide and issue a visa for me because this is a football competition and this is not a Russian competition. So, but I didn't go, and since then I'm not allowed to go to Russia anymore. And as I said, I don't want. So it's really complicated for me to say if something improved in Russia. But to be honest, I doubt it that the culture of doping, which has been existing for decades in that country, that you can change that within a very short period of time. You need to change the people in charge. And that's what I don't see in Russia. I see the contrary. I see that they celebrate people like Tutberidze for their success. I see that they have a certain approach to high performance sports. I see that this is obviously a patriotic thing for Russia, that athletes have to fulfill their commitments for the country. And that at the very end leads me to the conclusion that if you don't change your attitude and your approach on high performance sports in general, then you maybe have difficulties, you face difficulties to change your opinion about doping and all what might be help in an artificial way to improve performance. So I'm really critical on that. And what happened in 2018, 2019 underlines my view on that, because after the whole Russian doping scandal, remember that there have been lists, there have been data in the Moscow lab which had to be provided to WADA, and then they've faked and falsified all the metadata of that lab data in order to cover up more Russian doping cases. That means when they had to help to improve the situation and to clear the whole thing, even then they tried to fake, they tried to lie, and they lied obviously in front of the whole sports world. So if you see that, then I have my doubts that there has been really big improvement in place in the last couple of years. From my point of view, the whole thing, what I see now in the whole world with respect to Ukraine and Russia and to Putin, we have the same pattern in sports. If you allow them to compete, if you give them the possibility to be part of the sports world before they have cleared the whole situation, before they have really done their homework, you will always have the same situation. They use, from my point of view, is it sports, is it culture, is it politics? They use loopholes in order to get their advantages. You see it with Putin. We had an appeasement policy all over the place in Europe for many, many years. We tried to talk to Putin. We tried to have social contacts with Russia. We tried to find ways to collaborate with them in a certain degree. We used their gas imports and oil imports. We have been dependent on them. And what is the answer? It's a war. It's a war. And that's Putin. So many experts in Germany have warned people who have been in a way of sympathy for Putin to see and to understand the reality of that country. But obviously, many people didn't want to hear it. And now all these people in Germany, at least in my country, who have criticized our own policy that we are maybe too critical towards Putin, they are very silent at the moment, I think for good reason.
Well, thank you so much. It's a fascinating story, and we're definitely going to be interested in it for the next months and years. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All the best. Take care.